conference will now be recorded.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. It looks like we've got about 13 people on. We may get more as we progress with this, but what this is that it's, as you may recall, we were going to have a kickoff meeting for the West Harwich District of Critical Planning Concern back in March, but then we all got hit with COVID, and that meeting did get canceled. So we are trying to revive this and get it going again. So this is the August 4th workshop for the West Harwich District of Critical Planning Concern from here on out, called the DCPC, because it's way too long to say it each time. Again, welcome. My name is Charlene Greenhalgh, and I am your town planner. And also with us today, we have Sarah Korjeff, who is a Historic Preservation Specialist Planner from the Cape Cod Commission, if you want to give a wave there. And we also have Martha Heavner, who's a planner with the Cape Cod Commission. And Liz Kellum, who's also with the Commission, might be coming on. Oh, she is on right now. So she is on as well. They have been a great asset, a great resource for me in working on this DCPC. So our question and answer rules, I actually have the agenda, which I can pop up, but I think we have so few people, I think just running through it is fine. So the question and answers, what we're going to ask you to do is, if you can, write any questions you have in the chat room. There's a little thing called chat that you just push on. You can send a question to the group, which is probably what you want to do. For instance, Karen and Danny Horn said, working on a mic now, won't have camera on. So we know how they're doing. I'm going to give an overview on how we got here. And then Sarah Korjeff from the Cape Cod Commission is going to give a commission overview. We're going to run through the latest draft of the West Harwich Special District. And then we're going to do some questions and answers. So if no one has any questions, and if you do, pop it in the chat. If you're having any technical difficulties, we can try and walk you through it. I do have everybody muted right now, so you can be whistling at home in the background if you want, and we won't hear it here. So how did we get here? So as some of you may recall, back in early 1919, holy mackerel, in 2019, the planning board received an application for a retail store. It included about a 7,400 square foot retail building, the related parking, and also the demolition of an old historic sea captain's home. The application raised a lot of concern amongst the neighbors and the townspeople, and public hearings were held with the planning board that were really heavily attended. In fact, at one point, one meeting, we had over 100 people, which was astonishing. We've never had a public hearing like that that I can recall. Because there was so much input and concern by the neighbors, the planning board did invite John Eidman from the Cape Cod Commission to attend a meeting of the planning board to provide an overview of what the District of Critical Planning Concern process was, how it can work for the town, how we might be able to utilize that. Ultimately, the applicant did withdraw their application without prejudice. However, there was still a concern in the corridor of Route 28 from the Dennisport town line to the Herring River, and this area is also known as Captain's Row. And also there was a pending demolition of that same sea captain's home. They had already received a demolition permit from the Historic Commission, and that was set to expire, the delay on that. So in conversations with the Board of Health at a public meeting, they did instruct me to prepare a District of Critical Planning Concern nomination. And that began in late August, and we did submit an application. It was accepted. It went through all the different processes, a couple different hearings before the Cape Cod Commission, Assembly of Delegates, and ultimately it went to the Barnstable County commissioners, who did approve the DCPC nomination and created a county ordinance. I think it was 1918 was the number, on December 4th, 2020. So that's how this all got started. And how we got to the point of having to draft up some regulations. And from here, I'm actually going to turn it over to, I'm going to get in here, to Sarah Korjeff, and I'm going to allow her. I don't know if you can unmute yourself, Sarah. I may have to do that for you.
I can, yes.
Oh, there you go. You can. Perfect.
All right, well, thanks, Charlene. So again, my name's Sarah Korjeff. I'm on the planning staff at the Cape Cod Commission, and really my job today is to explain a little bit more about the ordinance that created the West Harwich DCPC and sort of how that relates to the proposed implementing regulations that, that you'll hear more about today. So the DCPC Ordinance lays out the goals and interests of the West Harwich District, which were essentially presented to the Cape Cod Commission by the town. They were proposed and identified as part of the nomination process when the Cape Cod Commission was considering creating a DCPC in this area. And once those goals and purposes of the DCPC were identified, the next step was really to figure out or to spell out some guidance that the town could use as they went forward to take the next step of developing new regulations for this area. And obviously the new regulations, which we call implementing regulations because they're part of the District of Critical Planning Concern, those implementing regulations have to protect the goals and interests that are identified in the DCPC Ordinance. So what I'm going to do is walk through the goals and interests, sort of refresh people's memories about what they are, and then I'm going to walk through the guidelines or the guidance that's in the ordinance, specifically giving direction to the town as they're developing their new regulations. And then Charlene will be able to walk through the proposed regulations themselves, and we'll be able to see how these things flow from one to another and sort of the relationship between them. And hopefully it'll make it a little easier for people to understand and give you a sense of, if you have any questions to ask. So with that, I think I am going to share my screen so that people will have a little bit of a graphic to watch as I walk through this. Let's see. Just do this. Share. And so it's just loading. Can people see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the goals of the West Harwich DCPC were identified in the ordinance. There are 6 of them. And the first is to protect historic resources in the district. The second is to respect traditional development patterns that support neighborhood and village development styles. The third is to enhance the character of the West Harwich district. Fourth is to support and enhance the small-scale local economy in West Harwich. Fifth is to manage traffic congestion and improve access management along Route 28. And the 6th is to improve bicyclist and pedestrian access and safety along the Route 28 corridor. So you can see there are several different sort of issue areas that are covered in those 6 goals. And because of that, we've divided, the ordinance divides the guidance to the town into 4 separate components. Let's see. And so those 4 separate components deal with 4 issue areas of cultural resources, community design, transportation safety, and a balanced local economy. And I guess I want to just start by saying that most of the guidelines that are spelled out in the ordinance are just that. They're guidance, they're recommended things for the town to consider as they're developing regulations for this area. But there are a few items that are required because they're believed to be really essential to meeting the goals and protecting the interests of the DCPC. So as I walk through the guidelines in the ordinance, I'll point out those that are required for the town to incorporate into their implementing regulations. But first, looking at the issue of historic and cultural resources, there are 3 guidelines. The first is consider incentives to protect and preserve historic resources, such as flexibility and dimensional regulations for historic properties, or allowing additional uses in historic properties, or increase lot coverage on lots that contain historic structures. The second guideline is to explore ways to prevent demolition of historic properties, such as establishing a local or a National Register historic district, or perhaps strengthening the town's existing demolition delay bylaw. And the third guideline is to consider design guidelines for additions and alterations made to historic structures. Okay. The second set of guidelines deals with the issue of community design, or sort of design and placement of structures within the district. And the first guideline here is one of the ones that is required, and that is to change dimensional regulations to be consistent with traditional development patterns. And that includes items like building setback, parking location, building massing. The guideline goes on to say that traditional development patterns include, but are not limited to, siting buildings closer to the street, parking located to the side or the rear of buildings, and parking with limited visual impact of parking along the street frontage. The town should examine the scale, setbacks, and massing of existing historic structures to help define the appropriate scale and form of new development and redevelopment. And I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but I want to mention, because this guideline in particular goes into the greatest amount of detail, that the Cape Cod Commission staff did also prepare a memorandum for the town that explores some of these specific issues, looking at existing conditions in the West Harwich district. What is the existing building setback for all the structures there? What is the scale of buildings and things like that? And if folks are interested in digging into this issue a little bit more deeply, or just seeing what recommendations and other suggestions we had in that memorandum, they can do that. It's available on the town's website. So the second guideline under the heading of community design is consider developing architectural and site design guidelines to protect community character. So under guideline 1, we talked about design guidelines dealing with historic properties, and here we're talking about design guidelines for any kind of new construction and sort of the area in a broader sense. Okay, the third guideline, third set of guidelines deals with transportation management and safety, and this is the other required element of the town's implementing regulations. This first guideline here is develop regulations to promote site access management best practices, such as shared driveways and minimizing the number and width of curb cuts along Route 28. The other three guidelines under this category are work with Mass DOT and others to explore ways to improve pedestrian, bicyclist, and transit accommodations along Route 28. Also to consider regulations that promote pedestrian connections to sites within the district. And finally, consider adopting regulations to limit high traffic generating uses within the district to improve traffic safety in the area. And then the fourth set of guidelines deals with the balanced local economy. And here again, there are 4 items. The first is directing the town to explore options for encouraging mixed use and multifamily development in forms that are consistent with the district's character. Second is consider focusing density in one part of the district to create a village center focal point. Third is review allowed uses and permitting processes to consider modifying them to support small scale businesses, a diverse local economy, and reuse of historic properties. And finally, consider modifying lighting and signage regulations for the district to support its unique character. So those, as I said before, many of those items are explored in greater detail in the memorandum that the Cape Cod Commission staff put together dated March 31st. And if you go to the West Harwich DCPC webpage under the town's website, you can take a look at that and see some more information about each of those items. So I think the only other part of my presentation, and maybe I don't need to share my screen anymore. Let's see. Here we go. The only other thing I was going to cover initially, at least, is sort of the process and the next steps. So I think Charlene mentioned when the Dcpc Ordinance was created on December 4th of 2019, the process for creating and sort of putting DCPCs into place allows the town 12 months to create these implementing regulations and to adopt them. Now, there is the potential for a 3-month extension, but the town actually has been making great progress in putting together a draft and already sharing it with the planning board and sort of getting it out there to other interested parties. And this meeting is part of that process. Our hope is that we actually that the town won't need to request the additional 3 months, but that that is there if necessary. So the real steps here are for the town to gather as much public input as possible, as well as have local boards review the proposed implementing regulations. And once they've done some of that, they can actually present the proposed implementing regulations to the Cape Cod Commission for their consideration. And really the purpose of doing that is just for the commission to have an opportunity to make sure that the proposed regulations are meeting the goals and intent of the DCPC and that they're following and including any of the specific guidelines that were required. And obviously they'd like to hear that other guidance included in the ordinance was at least considered as part of the process of developing these regulations. So once the commission has determined, and I should say the anticipation is that the Cape Cod Commission would consider the town's proposed implementing regulations at one of its September meetings. And then assuming the commission determines that the regulations conform, then it's up to the town to then adopt those regulations, which in this case would mean bringing them to town meeting. And I think maybe that's enough for now, but I'm sure if people have questions, there'll be a chance to come back to any of them. So I'll turn it back to Charlene.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for that overview. That was great. So kind of going along with what Sarah said, the plan here is that, let me back up. So originally, we were supposed to have a town meeting in May. As we all know, that got postponed and is now scheduled for Saturday, September 26th. Originally, the Board of Selectmen agreed to allow us the time that we felt we needed to work on the document and then potentially have a special town meeting in the fall. Well, now our regular town meeting is in the fall, so we don't have that cushion that we were hoping that we would have. That being said, we have been working on this document since April. I've been working very closely with the commission staff, who has been absolutely wonderful and just a wealth of information and guidance. And it has, and we've had several iterations. And it's also been on the planning board agenda for their input and review. And we've gotten some good input from them as well. I've also sent it out to all of you who are on the email list that I have. And I have about 71 people on that list now. So anybody on that list got a copy of the latest draft, which is dated July 31st. I mean, it's literally almost changing like every other day. So, but the latest draft is July 31st. That got put on the website. It also was put on the notice for this meeting on the website and sent out to anybody on the email page. So what we're hoping to do is have this finalized with the minimum requirements we need to have, which is actually pretty heavy. There's a lot to it that we've already drafted, but get those minimum requirements to meet the regulatory requirements of the Cape Cod Commission and the ordinance to the Board of Selectmen for their meeting on August 17th, so that they can vote to send it back to the planning board to have the public hearing process. It's staff recommendation at many levels that the selectmen actually be the sponsors of this zoning article, because they were the ones who were the nominators. They were the initial nominating body for the designation of the DCPC. So, you know, after talking with the interim town administrator, Joe Powers, you know, it was felt that it really should go to the selectmen. It also gives us a little bit more wiggle room than if it was going to be sponsored by the planning board. The planning board will be reviewing this themselves at the next planning board meeting, which is next Tuesday night, the 11th of August. So there's still some time for input, but I will be getting what I hope is the near final document to the Board of Selectmen by noon on August 12th. All that being said, and let's see if I can share now. Let's see. So hopefully you all can see this. So the document is going to be called the West Harwich Special District, and it will be a new article within the zoning bylaw. And within that document itself is the statutory authority and purpose. And basically what that is, it just says how it got to be, how it was approved by the Barnstable County Assembly of Delegates, and then approved by the Cape Cod Commission, and then approved by the county commissioners. And then what the purpose of the district is. And I will read the purpose. The purpose of the West Harwich Special District, as designated in Barnstable Ordinance 1918, is to preserve the significant historic and architectural resources in the area, to guide development to be consistent with the area's unique character, to address safety and transportation impacts within the commercial zone on Route 28, and to promote small-scale business consistent with the area's character. The next section is the intent of the bylaw, and that kind of mirrors the purpose, but that does say, and it is the intent of this bylaw, to encourage and incentivize the retention, preservation, creative reuse, change of use, or expansion of use of existing historic structures I found a typo, to the greatest extent possible, or to the extent possible. So I think that's really, really important. And the next section is 325-146, which is the applicability section. And so the DCPC map, which is the West Harwich Special District map, dated July 27, 2020, and prepared by the Cape Cod Commission, would become part of this bylaw. We did talk at great lengths as to whether this should be what's considered an overlay district, or doing away completely with the commercial district and just having the West Harwich Special District. It was decided to leave it as an overlay district because under the confines of the DCPC regulations, the overlay district is the district. That is what you need to follow. We have another DCPC in town called the Six Pond Special District. And that is, it's not an overlay, it's a special district, and the requirements within that district are what hold that district true and what you do need to follow. So, you know, there would still be a commercial district underlying, but the overall special district would be the one that would be followed. We also created a couple definitions, and one is historic structures. And I will read that one. Historic structures, those structures located within the boundaries of the West Harwich Special District and which are identified in the Town of Harwich Historic Properties Inventory List. Additionally, the following properties identified by the street address and the assessor's map and parcel are also determined to be historic structures for the purpose of this bylaw. There were 8 properties that were not listed in the historic list on the Historic Commission's website, but were deemed to be historically significant. So we did add those to the list. And the other definition we created was that for principal building facade. And what that is the front plane of a building wall closest to the road frontage, not including stoops, porches, or other appurtenances, and measuring at least 25 feet in length. We needed a definition for that to help us with our setbacks that we were looking to establish under this special district. And I'm trying to scroll down and it's not letting me. Let's see, hold on 1 second. See if I can do this. Whoop, that's not right. There we go. Next is what would be permitted uses. And these would be uses allowed by right, but in some cases they would require some kind of site plan review, and we'll get into that in a moment. So there are a number of different uses that are shown in that list, ranging from single family dwellings all the way down to certain municipal uses. Additionally, there would be 4 uses which would be permitted in historic structures. And those would be multifamily, retail sales, and that should say retail sales, restaurant, and mixed use. So if you're going to be retaining and utilizing a historic structure, we're trying to make it a little bit easier through the process. The list of, I'll get to that one. Remind me about that one, Ralph. Ralph just asked where the historic list can be found. It can actually be found on the town website. If you look at the Historic District Historic Commission website under boards and committees, the list is there and you can click right on that link. So thank you for that question. I'm glad that popped up and that was a great question. And then there's also a number of special permit uses. So there are uses for buildings that are not identified as historic uses that would require a use special permit. And that includes multifamily, retail sales, and that's greater than 1,000 feet of gross floor area or exterior space, a restaurant, or mixed use commercial residential development. The next part of the bylaw is prohibited uses. And in the underlying zoning throughout town, what is the benefit of keeping the commercial district and adding the overlay? I will jump to that question. Because time is kind of the essence to get this moving and get to the Board of Selectmen and adopted before the December 4th date, the 1-year date, we would have had to have changed the whole zoning maps. We would have to change the use schedules and the dimensional schedules to add the West Harwich Special District in. After talking it through, quite honestly, at great lengths, we determined that the special district in and of itself is its own district. So we felt that it didn't need to be, if we didn't need to nullify that commercial district. We still want people to know that, yes, it is a commercial district, but only certain uses are going to be allowed. If you look at all the uses that are allowed in the CH1 zoning district, the underlying zoning, it's an extensive list, and we've culled that down dramatically under the West Harwich Special District. So there was a method to that madness. A lot of it was time constraint, but also the realization that we really didn't need to go that extra step. And, oh, thank you for the clarification. Good, I'm making sense. So in other areas of town, you can go for use variance, but we've made it very clear here that any use not specifically allowed as of right or by special permit within this district are prohibited. Within this district, use variances shall be prohibited, so that somebody can't come in and try to establish a use that otherwise is prohibited either by right or special permit in this district. We have a provision 325-151, continuation of pre-existing non-conforming uses. We don't want to make it that an existing use cannot continue. There are some uses there that I honestly bet a lot of you are not even aware of. There's actually a machine shop in the old Napa, where the Napa Auto Parts is, and he runs a great little business there. From the outside, you wouldn't even know it. So there are uses that would not now be allowable, but would be allowed to be continued. And the other thing that we've created is under our zoning bylaw, we already have what I consider a very good site plan approval process. And that is section 325, 32555 of the zoning bylaw. And that is, that review process would remain. So I want to make sure people are aware of that. But if somebody is doing a development or an addition of 250 square feet or less of gross building footprint or exterior footprint, the proposal is, particularly if you're using a historic structure, that it would be a staff at the staff review level. One of the questions that's come up in the past is regarding demolition, because in the historic demolition delay bylaw, even if you're demoing a wall that requires their review, that will still continue. Even if you get review sign off from the town planner or whoever the planning board designates as the staff review person or entity, you still have to go through the historic commission, historic district review. So that part of it would not change. So as long as an application meets all the requirements of the dimensional requirements that we're establishing herein, then it can be done by staff. If it's up to 1,000 square feet, we have a provision under the site plan review for a waiver of site plan. And anything up to 1,000 square feet, whether it's existing, whether it's new gross floor area or external exterior space, that could go under the site plan waiver provision of section 32555F. And anything over 1,000 square feet would have to comply with all the requirements and would have to go through site plan review like you would in any other commercial district that we have in town. And for new construction, if you're doing brand new construction, you're either on a vacant lot or you're not touching another historic building, new construction for site plan approval and all dimensional requirements would have to be met. So not much different there, but you would have to go through the full process of site plan approval. And then under section 325-154, we created the dimensional requirements. And that is new dimensional requirements for structures and also for parking, driveways, vehicular and pedestrian access standards. I don't want to get too much into that. It is available. And if people have, specific questions, one thing I did want to bring up in the latest draft, the July 31st draft, we had proposed that the front setback requirement for the principal building facade shall be a minimum of 10 feet and a maximum of 30 feet. We did have a suggested alternative that the front setback shall be an average of the setback distance of the adjacent lots on each side of the subject property or 10 feet, which is ever greater. In talking with Cape Cod Commission staff, we came to the realization that we have a couple structures in this district that are well over 100 feet back from the road. And we didn't want that to be a factor in determining where a front building could go. So if you're in between that structure that's 100 feet back and the one next to you is 50 feet back, it means you have to be 75 feet back. And I think that would really detract from the visual characteristic that we're trying to maintain and create here. And it would also preclude that structure that's 100 feet back from being allowed to put a front structure on there, which I don't think we want to deter that from happening either. A couple important things. Parking would have to be to the side or rear of the building. And we would require that there be only one vehicle access from your frontage. And if at all possible, we ask, where feasible, that you actually share the parking or share the driveway access with an adjacent property. And let's see if this is going to work for me. So I think a lot of you have already seen the map, but here is the map. So those are the district boundaries. The underlying zoning district CH1 is only 200 feet deep. The boundaries for the West Harwich DCPC actually step back to the rear property line, except for the parcels where the habitat housing is going. We wanted to be sure that the habitat homes that were being constructed were outside of the district. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and look at my agenda here. I think we are manageable enough that seems like 10 foot is rather small for a I just lost that. It's here. For rather small for predominantly residential neighborhood. Actually, I'm gonna, Sarah, could you unmute for a second?
Sure.
So I just want to have a conversation here. When we looked at the setbacks for the district and in the online webpage that we created for the DCPC, the commission staff did a map showing the existing setbacks of various buildings, and they do vary significantly for that area. And yes, there are a lot of residential structures there, but there are also a lot of commercial structures in that district. So we didn't want to preclude anybody from, wanting to be that close. And what we're kind of envisioning is, I don't know if somebody's going to want to build a residence 10 feet from Route 28, but they may want to build a mixed use development where your commercial is towards the front of the property. And also from a standpoint of a planner, when you can get a building a little bit closer to a road, it usually diminishes the size of signage that you may have for that particular building, which signage is something that we're going to look at after, assuming this gets adopted. So we want to look at that on top of things. But we did look at the various setbacks between, and I apologize, my phone is ringing, I forgot to take it off the hook, to see where buildings actually are right now on the ground. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Sarah.
Sure, I'll add a little bit. I think it's important to note that, this is something that we do want public input, or at least the town wants some public input on it. When we looked at the building setbacks, we were trying to measure from the edge of the road right of way back to the sort of the front of the building on the lots. And in doing an analysis of that, of all the existing buildings within the district, we found that most of the structures are actually between 25 and 35 feet back from the edge, but there are some historic properties in particular that are that are only 10 feet setback. And there also are some historic properties that are significantly further setback. So I think it's important to remember that existing buildings can stay as they are. They're not going to be required to, to move the structure to meet any new setback requirements. So we're thinking about new construction and really what pattern you want that new construction to follow. And that's why in identifying sort of the predominant range and sort of the character of most of the buildings along the road frontage is really what I think we want to see there. But, the idea with a range is that we don't necessarily want to see all, West Harwich today does not have all the buildings following the same building setback. So there is a nice range of setbacks that provides for some nice variety. And So establishing a range is, in the permitted setback is really the best way to assure that any new development that comes along stays consistent with that range.
And also, for properties containing and maintaining reusing historic structures, the planning board or its designee may waive or modify these dimensional requirements. So if during the planning process, through site plan review, whichever level it is, it may be that, 10 feet is too close. Maybe we need to set it back. There can be that conversation. And in some cases, maybe even 30 feet may be too close. So there is that flexibility through the review process to work with an applicant to come up with what might be best suited for the properties. There is a question, and I'm glad he asked this question. And this is from Ralph, how does the state's sidewalk project play into this plan? Actually, it plays into this plan really well. One thing to keep in mind is you have the road pavement and then you have the road right-of-way. In some cases, the road right-of-way is almost 80 feet wide. In other places, it's more like 50 or 60 feet wide. So the setback is from the edge of the road right-of-way, not from the edge of the road pavement. So that's a critical thing to remember as you're thinking about the bylaw and the setbacks. So it's not going to be 10 feet from the asphalt of Route 28. It's going to be from the road right-of-way. And then Ralph also had, my concern is new construction. How about a 20-foot setback so it doesn't look like Main Street? I'm not quite sure what that means, or if we're talking Main Street here in Harwich Center. I
think perhaps, oh, I'm sorry, Charlene.
No, go ahead, Sarah.
I think perhaps he's trying to suggest that a different setback range might be appropriate for new construction, that rather than the 10 to 30, that perhaps it would be 20 to 35 or 20 to 40 or something like that. So I think that's something that the planning board and others would be helpful if folks weighed in on that.
Is that what you were saying, Ralph?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So new construction, I'm writing notes here. And I think that's something we actually probably could do along the lines of for properties with historic structures, as defined with the new definition, can be the 10 to 30 feet, and maybe perhaps for new construction, no less than 20 feet.
I think we want to have a top end. I mean, one of the reasons for having a maximum setback is to really require that any new developments have the parking to the side or the rear.
Right, right.
So it's helpful to sort of have that range in there. But I think that's something that could be accommodated.
Okay. Okay. Are some great questions so far. Does anybody else have any questions?
Is the mic on?
Yeah, I hear you.
Oh, good. Wonderful. Yeah, I have a couple questions.
Okay, make sure you say who you are, Sally, even though I know who you are.
I'm Sally from West Harwich. Hello, everybody. And thank you. I'm never going to stop saying thank you because the amount of work you all put in, and I'm so grateful and looking forward to seeing this to fruition. I had just a couple of questions. I need a sort of background information if you can help me out. So first, in looking at the map, I don't remember, it may have been addressed, why we left out the West Harwich Schoolhouse out of that map. So it's not, as far as I can tell, it's not in the DCPC map area.
We mapped properties that fronted on Route 28, so that does not front on Route 28. So that, back when we did this, that's what we came up with at that time.
Okay, and can we change that at this point? or what would we do?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, fair enough.
I think perhaps in the future, we might be able to, but I don't think we can do that right now because it would not be consistent with what the county approved.
Okay. And my other question was, I know you addressed it, Charlene, in uses under 325-148 permitted uses, it talks about municipal use. Do we have any idea what that could be? Do they have to follow the same guidelines? In other words, they can't put in a cell tower or a solar farm. What would municipal use? Did you guys talk about that?
There could be a number of municipal uses. I mean, right now, let's say that the church, the Baptist church, for some reason the town acquires that and creates some kind of a use there. We want to make sure that it's nothing that would be prohibited, if the town were for some reason to take over the church building, that they would utilize that. It could be a meeting house. It could be a number of different things.
Okay. And then just my last one, which was just a concern and I didn't quite understand, and that maybe I don't understand zoning. So if you'll give me the backstory. It's under...
Sorry, I only laugh because nobody understands zoning.
It's review standards. I think it's number 7. It talks about the maximum building footprint of 2,000 square feet on front-facing buildings. It's allowable. And then it says a maximum footprint of 6,000 square feet for buildings sited behind a front street-facing building. I just was surprised at the size of that, thinking about when we were working against the Dollar General, that's about the size of the Dollar General they were going to put in. Did you talk about that? Is this correct? Am I misunderstanding something?
It's funny because Sarah and I were just talking about that yesterday, in fact, I believe, Sarah. And, and these numbers are very flexible indeed. If people want to see them smaller, but in looking at the district itself, you have an 80%, you can have 80% lot coverage, and that's your building, that's your parking, that's your walkways. So in order to get and your parking has to be the side or the rear. So to get all those amenities on there, the chances, looking at it very quickly, the chances of getting a 6,000 square foot structure in there with, with all your parking to the rear and everything, I think that, is going to be tough. I think 6,000 is large, and I certainly would have no problems, if folks have a thought on what might be more palatable.
Okay. I'll talk to some people, see what other people think, and, keep the conversation going with you guys, because I think 6,000 square feet, I still think it sticks in my craw a bit, especially where we're kind of also a neighborhood and what we're trying to do. And I'm hoping that maybe we can reduce the size a little bit. I don't know what is reasonable, but 6,000 seems like a lot.
I'm trying to find my calculator real quick here.
I think that's a fair comment. Well, Charlene's looking. We did, just by pulling up town assessors cards, we did look at the square footage of building footprints that are there today. And the vast majority of the buildings, particularly the historic ones, have a building footprint of around 2,000 square feet. There are a few that are larger. There are some properties that are larger in that area and that have larger commercial buildings on them. That if you're familiar with the Town Line Plaza, that's almost a 7,000 square foot building footprint, just to give you a sense of reference. I think it's worth noting that the way it's drafted right now, you would only be allowed to have up to a 6,000 square foot building if you first have a smaller frontage building that will screen it. So that's the theory behind it. You may still believe that 6,000 is too big. Then that's, something that would be great to get more feedback on. But you should know that it would only be allowed in very limited situations, and it would, from the road frontage at least, it would be screened by a building that's more consistent with the existing scale and character.
Okay, thank you for that. And that's what I have. And thank you.
Sally, if you know, if you want to talk to folks, if you could get me, I know you're quick with this stuff. If you could get me something, you know, by like tomorrow morning,
Yeah.
that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally.
Okay, bye.
Let's see, from Patricia, thinking about the road project and the West Harwich Special District, how will street lighting be approached so that the commercial use and residential use maintain the character of the district? I do know that when the town spoke with Mass Department of Transportation regarding improvements to Route 28 in this area, there was a conversation to allow for what I'm going to call period lighting, so that it was more historically oriented lighting. And at that time, I mean, the conversation was a couple of years ago, but at that time, the state was amenable to that type of lighting. Certainly, the planning board under site plan review does have the ability to review lighting. It does need to meet the lighting code. You know, I can only imagine, it's not stipulated, but I can only imagine that the planning board through review is going to try and ensure that lighting is consistent with the historic feel of this area, and that it's in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. And Ralph says perhaps reduce the percentage of lot coverage. Right now, the lot coverage in that area is 80%, with only a 15% building coverage. I think that's what it is. Don't hold me to that. I don't have my bylaw in front of me. Keep in mind that the lot coverage is both the building and the parking and walkways. So whoever is developing this property, you know, needs to be able to fit everything that they need on the property, but also maintain a green space out front and along the sides and buffering your parking. So the reality of actually seeing an 80% in most cases probably won't happen, but there may be instances where a development, you know, would have only would have 80% lot coverage, but it may look absolutely, you know, wonderful in the project that's being proposed. The word project, I like development better. We agree with Sally that 6,000 opens up many unwanted possibilities. Ralph, get together with Sally and you guys come up with some kind of recommendation there. Patricia said, thank you. You are very welcome. Are there any other questions? I'm going to share one last screen, I promise, if I can find it. Hopefully it'll pop up. Ta-da! So if you do have any questions or comments and you want to get them to either myself or Sarah Korjeff, here are our email addresses. I know my name is long and crazy, but if you have any questions, you know, absolutely reach out and let us know what you're thinking. We are kind of on a fast track here, so we are, so we're trying to, you know, get as much done as we possibly can. Our concern is if we don't get something approved at the September town meeting, that we may not be in a position to have a special town meeting come January, February, which would be within that 90-day extension period. We were hoping maybe because of COVID that year to do something might get a little stretched, but unfortunately it didn't. Not the answer we were hoping for, but you know, certainly understandable. And what would also be happening is, you know, assuming this gets approved at the September town meeting, we would still be working towards creating review guidance, review guidelines, and some other elements that really weren't required at this stage of the preparation of this document. So we would still, this got approved on the 26th of September, and it was approved by the Cape Cod Commission, and we send it off to the Attorney General. We would be starting immediately to work on other elements of this bylaw to help complement it. So I hope that is, and could you just recap the next step dates for us? Yes, I will, very quickly. So the planning board will be reviewing this again. They're not the sponsors of this article, but they'll be reviewing again on the 11th. I need to do a quick turnaround and get what I hope is the final document to the Board of Selectmen on the 12th of August for their meeting on the 17th of August, so that they would then turn around and refer it to the planning board so that the planning board can hold its public hearing process. The anticipated date of the public hearing before the planning board, it's a tight one, folks, is September 22nd, which is Monday. So it's only the Monday before the town meeting. Small changes perhaps can be made if we discover typos, if you know, the thought is to have a setback change. One thing to keep in mind, that on the floor of town meeting, a zoning amendment can be less restrictive, but not more restrictive than what is being presented to the town meeting. So for an example, and I'll just use a setback. If we say that the setback is 10 feet from the front line, you can't change it on town meeting floor to go to 20 feet because it's more restrictive than what the proposal was in the first place. If it's 20 feet and there's a proposal to go to 10 feet, that you more than likely could do. It's within the scope of the bylaw and it's becoming less restrictive. So those are a couple things that, you know, to keep in mind. So that's the process at this point. Definitely. Oh, go ahead, Sarah. Oh,
I was just
you guys.
I was wondering if it would be okay to just ask a question of folks, since we have a bunch of people here who are very engaged, because we've got a lot of folks in the chat who've commented that they think the 6,000 square foot building footprint is too large. And I'm wondering whether it would be fair to ask whether people would rather see you know, a maximum of 3,000 square foot for a sort of a rear building footprint maximum, or 4 or 2, or whether people have in their head, you know, what the appropriate size is. I think I mentioned that, you know, we did look at a lot of the existing building footprints. Many of the historic properties have a building footprint that ranges around 2,000 square feet. There are certainly a couple exceptions to that, because there are some buildings that have had a number of additions, and altogether they, you know, they could range, like the Irish Pub, for example. The main building on that site is closer to 5,000 square feet with all its additions. But since that's an existing building, you know, it's kind of a separate story. There are, when you look at some of the small commercial buildings along the stretch, like Terry's Hair Salon, or some of the buildings that are across from the church, I believe they're more in the 2,000 to 3,000 square foot range. So just with those numbers out there, interested to hear what people think.
And if you do want to speak, just let us know who you are, or you can type your comments in. Karen and Danny Horn say 4,000 sounds more reasonable. If anybody knows.
I agree. Ginny Doyle, I agree. 4,000 should be maximum.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks, Jenny. And thanks for identifying yourself. I'm like, who is that? And I love your ceiling, by the way. That's very cool.
Well, Okay.
So I'm wondering, Ralph Diamond here, may I speak?
Yes, Ralph, I was just going to read your comment, but if you want to speak, absolutely. Go ahead, Ralph.
Well, given that our goal for this whole project is to maintain the historic character of the, the village, why would we not want to make a maximum new construction of something closer to 2,000 square feet? So we don't run the risk of having, a warehouse situation or something like that going on.
Yeah, well, a warehouse would not be allowable under the zoning, so that's a good one.
Something that we might find unappealing and which we hadn't allowed, whatever it might be. 2,000 isn't set in stone for me, but I'm just thinking that the smaller the better.
Okay, we do have right now, the proposal is to have 2,000 square feet for the front building for maximum footprint. One of the thoughts, and Sarah definitely helped me out here because you're the historic person more than I am, but if you have a 2,000 square foot building, footprint building in front, oftentimes from a visual aspect, having a slightly larger building behind is very much in keeping with, historic elements. Sarah, you probably can explain it way better.
Well, I think it's fair to say that a building that's set behind another structure further back from the road, that front structure can do a good job of screening what's behind. And so you can accommodate a larger building to the rear, often without harming the sort of overall character of an area. But, recognizing that this property or this district abuts residential uses to the rear, and recognizing that you have a couple of commercial developments that have a sort of a cluster of small buildings rather than a single structure, any of those options really is possible. I guess you have to sort of think about what kind of flexibility you want to allow for businesses. And, if you're looking at encouraging local businesses, is it possible that they might need a space that's bigger than 2,000 square feet? So there's a number of considerations.
Mm-hmm. Patricia commented that she agrees 4,000 square feet is good. Cindy Williams, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second, hon. From a standpoint of, chamber and, economic development, and if you don't want to answer, you don't have to, but, what do you think?
I think the direction we're going so far is great. I do like the idea of the 4,000 capping at that. I mean, we really know where we started, how we started this whole process was what was going on. So I think if we cap it at that, that gives us some flexibility of some things that would be acceptable and staying within all of the uses as well. So I think I'm in agreement with the 4,000 as well.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question. You're right. No, I'm not. I have a question again. What do you envision? What are we envisioning here? Are we envisioning retail? Are we talking about retail spaces, or are we talking about multifamily uses when we're talking about?
Ralph, it could really, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at the list of permitted uses.
Yeah,
but I'll just run through it really quickly. So permitted uses are single family dwelling, 2-family dwelling. Use is accessory too. So let's say you've got a house out front and you want to have a barn type garage out back. A bed and breakfast, a home occupation, single family dwelling with an apartment. And I did have a question from somebody last week. Why not just allow 2-family dwellings instead of also allowing a single family dwelling with an accessory apartment? A lot of that has to do with size. The maximum size in an accessory apartment is 900 square feet. And in a 2-family dwelling, it has to be a minimum square footage of, I think it's 12,000 square feet. Some people may not want to have a second dwelling unit on their property that's that large. Don't hold me to that 12,000. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. So there is a method to our madness. Church or other religious uses are allowable. A nonprofit library, museum, or historical use. Let's say we have somebody who wants to have their a smaller historic structure out front and a complementary building out back that would serve as a museum or you know, some other historic use that you know, you may need it to be bigger or look like a funky old historic barn or something like that to accommodate the use that you want to do there. I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head. Hotel and motel uses and incidentals to those. Professional offices, including dental offices and blue economy type uses, and then a municipal use. And then permitted uses, additional permitted uses in historic buildings, we won't go into that. But then uses allowable with a special permit outside of a historic structure are multifamily, retail sales, greater than 1,000, a restaurant, or a mixed-use commercial type development. So that's a quick list of the different uses that would be allowable. So things like a warehouse, a storage building, you know, unless it's somebody's garage, barn, what have you, for storage of whatever you may have, you know. That's basically it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, Ralph. Yeah, is it Sally?
No, it's Patty.
Oh, hi, Patty.
If this is way out of my expertise, but so I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, if you have a 4,000 square foot behind something else that's 2,000 square feet. For the most part, aren't you really probably only looking at a portion of that structure when you're viewing it from the street? And how does the requirement for, you know, all of the plantings and the greenery and all of that mitigate so that 4,000 might look like 3,200 or less? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm not expressing it well, but that's my question or thought.
Actually, I think you expressed it very well, and I'm going to pitch to Sarah if that's okay.
Sure. Well, I think the fact is that pretty much all of the lots within the West Harwich Special District, I think, are such that having a smaller frontage building would screen something further back on the lot, and the fact that where the regulations also would require that the parking be to the side or the rear. So I think what people are going to experience most is what's up close to the road, and you won't have parking right at the front of the road or right at the road's edge if it's new construction. So, and I think the landscaping requirements right now are proposed to follow the ones that the town currently has in their site plan review process, I believe, or special permit process. So if the town feels that those have been effective, I think that's good. Because every lot's a little bit different, I guess I don't think I can give you really a percentage that building to the rear would always be hidden, but it would be hard to, you know, given how far back it is and the fact that there's something else between you and there, I think it would be hard for you to be seeing the entire thing.
That's what I thought. And I was just trying to figure out the balance between preserving what we want to preserve and yet having enough flexibility for someone to be able to have a vision come to fruition. Because if we limited it too much, then we could be not doing ourselves a favor, I guess is what my thought is. So thank you both.
And I just, on the town website for the DCPC, there's a great graphic that the Cape Cod Commission staff put together for us that shows some of those existing properties and putting a new building out front or a new building out back to show what it might look like So definitely check that out on the town website under the DCPC, because I think that gave a really nice visual of some potential that could happen.
Charlene?
Yes.
Sally again. One quick thought. I was glad to hear you guys will still be thinking about developing design guidelines. And I think that could also come into play here, because if we're putting up another building and it's backing up to somebody's property, or even seeing it from the road, if somebody's putting up a quick steel flat roofed building, might not look so good, but if there are some design guidelines that we could give them and it looked a little bit different, might go a long way to making it useful and beautiful.
Agreed. Okay, anybody else have anything? I think this has been a great discussion. I want to thank you all for attending. Frankly, I'm pleased all of you did attend. I was thinking, oh geez, it's going to be me, Sarah, and Martha. Just
Oh, and I want to say thank you to you, Charlene, and to Sarah and everyone. It's just been so wonderful to work with you, and you've been so patient and efficient, and we can't thank you enough.
Oh, thanks.
Welcome.
Amen.
Oh, shucks. All right. So this. Oh, thanks, Ralph. It looks like we may not be live on this, but it's certainly going to be rebroadcast on Channel 18. You can also watch it again on YouTube if there's something you missed or you just want to see yourself on TV. So thank you all once again for participating. This really has been great. And I'm very excited about this moving forward. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Stay safe with the storm and be well.
Nice job.
Nice job.
Take care.
This conference is no longer being recorded.